started a webinar series that gives us a chance to interact with and hear from aerospace industries, some of the most prominent and renowned personalities of all time. If you have any questions during the presentations, please type them into the question box in your control panel. I will bring them up during the presentation, and we will also have the time for questions at the end. Now, without further ado, as a matter of fact and pride, we will turn the time over to our presenters today is Padma Shri Alluru Selene Kiran Kumar. Shri A.S. Kiran Kumar is Vikram Sarabhai Professor at Indian Space Research Organization, Bangalore. He is the member of the Space Commission, Government of India, and member, Governing Council, Indian Institute of Sciences, Bangalore. During 2015 to 2018, he has served as a Secretary, Department of Space, and Chairman, Indian Space Research Organization. Shri Kiran Kumar was born on October 22, 1952 in Hassan, Karnataka. He obtained his physics honors degree from National College, Bangalore in year 1971, MSc Physics in specializations with electronics from Bangalore University in year 1973, Masters of Technology degree in Physical Engineering from Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore in year 1975. He has steered the implementation of the applications-oriented Indian space program, which has facilitated rapid development of the country in many important spheres of the Earth observation, communication, navigation, meteorology, and space science, as well as the development of indigenous launch vehicle and related technologies for providing assured access to the space. He has contributed to the design and development of more than 50 electro-optical imaging sensors flown on space-bound platform, starting from Bhaskara TV payload in 1979 to the payloads on board on the successful mission Mars orbital mission in year 2013. He has played a crucial role in Chandrayaan-1 mission right from the conceptualization stage and has made exemplary contributions to the success of Mars orbital mission and reusable launch vehicle technology demonstration. Shri Kiran Kumar has been the chair of the Committee on Earth Observation Satellite, CEOS, in year 2012. He has made valuable contributions to the Coordination Group of Meteorological Satellites, CGMS, Expert Team on Satellite Systems, World Meteorological Organizations, and Indo-US Joint Working Group on Civil Space Cooperation. Shri Kiran Kumar is the President of the Aeronautical Society of India and a Fellow of Indian National Academy of Engineering, National Academy of Sciences, India, Indian Society of Remote Sensing, Institution of Electronics and Telecommunications Engineers, Indian Society of Systems for Science and Engineering, Indian Meteorological Society, Indian Society of Geomatics, Gujarat Science Academy, Andhra Pradesh Academy of Sciences, and an elected member of International Academy of Astronautics. He has been conferred with the Doctoral of Science by 18 Indian academic institutions. He has authored and co-authored around 85 publications in various national or international scientific journals, conferences, and symposiums. In recognition of his contributions, he was conferred with Padma Shri Award by the President of India in year 2014. The government of Karnataka honored him with the Rajyotsav Award for the year 2015 for his contribution to the space science and technology. Bharat Ratna Sir M. Visvesvaraya Senior Scientist State Award for the year 2013 and Lifetime Achievement Award from Karnataka Science and Technology Academy in the year 2016. He is the recipient of Indian Institute of Science Distinguished Alumnus Award for the year 2015, Gujarat Ratna Life of Innovation Award conferred by Gujarat Innovation Society in the year 2014, and Lifetime Achievement Award by Andhra Pradesh Academy of Science in the year 2016. Bharat Ratna Sir M. Visvesvaraya Senatory Award for Innovation in Technology conferred by University of Mysore in year 2016. G.M. Modi Science Award by Gujjar Mal Modi Science Foundation in year 2016. 19th SIES Chandrasekhar Saraswati National Eminence Award in year 2016. H.K. Firodia Vigyan Ratna Award by H.K. Firodia Foundation in 2017. And Santogoba Award instituted by SRKKF Surat in year 2018. Shri Kiran Kumar has been conferred with the prestigious 2018 International Von Karman Wings Award instituted by the Aerospace Historical Society in collaborations with the Graduate Aerospace Laboratories at California Institute of Technology, on November 8, 2018. And the last and the final, the Chevalier d'Ordre National de l'Élégance d'Honneur Award, the highest civilian honor by the government of France on May 2nd, 2019. So without further delay, it is our great pleasure and honor to have you, sir. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation. On behalf of University of Petroleum and Energy Studies, I would like to thank for your kind time, and we could be able to understand what kind of work you have done as an ex-chairman on the mission Chandrayaan. Thank you so much, sir, for accepting our invitation. Now it's over to you. And thank you again, sir, for accepting our invitation. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Sudhir. Thank you for that introduction, and also good morning to all the viewers of this program. And what I intend to do today, though the title is Indian Interplanetary Missions, I would be concentrating on the activities what we have done during the course for Chandrayaan. And ISRO, right from its inception, made use of every opportunity available for conducting space science experiments. It started with sounding rockets. In fact, the whole story of ISRO's or India's space program started with bringing in sounding rockets in the form of kits and assembling it in the church of the Tumba Equatorial Rocket Launching Site. And using those sounding rockets, upper atmospheric research experiments were conducted. And that's how India started its space program. And as the technological capability of developing rockets, building satellites started happening, we included space science experiments in our various programs. And the very first satellite which was launched by India, Aryabhatta, way back in 1975, carried X-ray astronomy, aeronomy, and solar physics experiments. And this Aryabhatta was a satellite which came across as a result of Indo-Soviet cooperation. And when the Soviets offered to launch a couple of satellites for us, this work started. Then, of course, gradually our own launch vehicle, SLV and ASLV, when it came, we had the Stretch Rohini series satellites carrying some of the experiment, gamma ray burst experiment, and retarding potential analyzer. As part of the Space Lab, Anuradha, of course, did not see the light of the day because of the developments at that time. But then gradually, as we started building our launch vehicle and satellite technology, we started making use of the capabilities for conducting experiments, whether it's an X-ray spectrometer or space observations. And then we started our first activity with respect to Chandrayaan-1 that was launched in 2008. We will see more details subsequently. And then we also had a YouthSat, which carried, in fact, some of the experiments from a Russian university, apart from our own teams within ISRO and in the country. And then, of course, we had the Mars Orbiter mission, AstroSat mission, and the later Chandrayaan-2, Aditya, and ExpoSat. See, as we started developing our capability, we had to make use of different types of orbits going from equatorial orbit, where we have our geostationary satellites, and inclined orbits, and also polar orbits. As we are aware that an equatorial orbit gives us more frequent observation, or if you are in a geostationary, continuous observation of a portion of the Earth. Whereas if you start looking at polar orbit, you can cover the entire globe, though the frequency of observation reduces. But then depending on the type of requirement, you go from equatorial orbit to polar orbit to different altitudes, starting from low Earth orbit to medium Earth orbit, and also geostationary or even Lagrange points, etc. So we have made use of different kinds of orbits during the course of our development, and we will see some more details of the geostationary transfer orbit and also the orbits which we have used for Chandrayaan. And typically, as the technological capability started developing, we started making sure that we had the capacity within our launcher to move further and further. So we started with a low Earth orbit, 500 to 900 or around 1,000 kilometers. Then we had our first of the geostationary platform satellites of the INSAT series, the first of which we had indigenous satellite developed by 1992, and then the first of our Kalpana satellite launched by our own launcher using the PSLV itself, and then the Chandrayaan mission, which took us to 385,000 kilometers, and then subsequently Mars mission, which is almost 200 million kilometers at the when Mars is closest, and about 400 million kilometers when it is at the farthest. So if you look at again continuation of this, we had the Chandrayaan 1, which was done in 2008, then Mars orbital mission done in 2013, and then the space astronomy astrosat done in 2015. So we also had a number of microgravity research experiments which were conducted using spacecraft recovery experiment, wherein we had a module which orbited Earth for a couple of orbits, about 15 to 16 orbits, and then we brought the satellite or the experiment back to Earth, going through the atmospheric, upper atmospheric area, and then the module itself had specially designed heat tiles for withstanding the high temperatures encountered during the descent into the Earth's orbit. And if you look at some of the results, what we got from the Mars mission, because I'm not talking much today on the Mars orbiter, and this was a very unique experiment where we made use of our PSLV launch vehicle for putting the satellite into the orbit. And while the initial design was meant to allow this satellite to go around Mars for a period of about 6 months, in fact, come this September, we would have completed almost 6 years of orbiting around Mars, and the satellite is still in good health and providing us some of the results. And what you are seeing here is some of the results which we have obtained from the Mars orbiter color camera system. And also it had one of the methane sensing sensor using which we were able to actually generate an apparent albedo at 1.66 micron. And what globe you are seeing is summary of that data. In fact, Chandrayaan 1 was the real mission where we were looking for building a capability using our own launch vehicle and a completely indigenous satellite. And then this was the first mission to Moon, and it was placed in the lunar orbit on 8th of November 2008. And it had many achievements because it carried 11 scientific instruments, carried 11 mission payloads with USA, UK, Germany, Sweden, and Bulgaria. And the first spacecraft to make the most significant discovery of water on the hydroxyl molecules on the surface of Moon. And Moon Impact Probe also was part of this mission. And our ISRO payloads in this were a terrain mapping camera capable of generating three-dimensional images of the Moon, a hyperspectral imager based on wedge filter concept, and then we had a lunar laser ranging instrument, and then high energy X-ray spectrometer, and also a Moon Impact Probe, which descended onto the surface of the Moon in an uncontrolled manner. We also had collaboration with many European and American agencies. We had the Chandrayaan 1 X-ray spectrometer, then sub-keV atom reflecting analyzer. Then along with the ESA, we had near infrared spectrometer, radiation dose monitor, a mini synthetic aperture radar, and also Moon mineralogy mapper. And in fact, this Moon mineralogy mapper and the miniature synthetic aperture radar were the basic instruments which enabled Chandrayaan 1 to actually discover presence of water and also the processes responsible for formation of hydroxyl and water molecules on the moon. And this was again launched using our own polar satellite launch vehicle. And we made use of a unique orbit trace maneuvers where the satellite itself was put into the orbit by the launcher in an highly elliptical orbit. Then using the resources available on the satellite, we gradually increased the apogee and then finally brought it to an apogee level where satellite came within the vicinity of moon's gravitational pull, and by redirecting and reorienting the satellite and reducing its velocity appropriately, we were able to get the satellite captured in the moon's orbit. And of course, in terms of scientific achievements of this mission, it successfully carried out the moon's environment surface processes. And then apart from the significant discovery of water, major findings included that the tenuous and active hydrosphere, then volcanically active, geologically dynamic moon. It was believed that the activities on moon had stopped long time back, but then some of the results from Chandrayaan-1 showed that that is not correct. In fact, their activity was there much later also with respect to what was initially thought of. Then it also established the global magma ocean hypothesis. And this also shows a number of results that what we were able to capture, the three-dimensional view of the moon surface created a large number of 2.5D views and also detected and located areas which could be identified for probable human habitat, like collapsed lava tubes, and then many such things, and also studying at fairly high resolution data using the Chandrayaan-1. In fact, this shows some more details of some of the results that we obtained using the Chandrayaan-1, many of the science outcome. And even as the satellite was going en route to moon, there were a number of experiments that were conducted to capture both Earth and Earth's atmosphere, and certain studies were carried out using this. Of course, then the work on Chandrayaan-2, because Chandrayaan-1, while the original plan was the satellite would last for a couple of years, we had the certain developments where the satellite instruments stopped functioning because of the failure of the power systems as a result of some temperature excursions, which went beyond what was initially planned. And while we were expecting the satellite to last for quite some time, we had after August of 2009, the satellite stopped functioning and stopped communicating with us. And then based on the findings of Chandrayaan-1, we started planning Chandrayaan-2 to improve on what was learned there, and also planned to have a rover which will be landed on the surface of the moon, and then lander and rover will move on the surface of the moon. And we had our Chandrayaan-2 planned with an orbiter, a lander, and a rover. And this particular mission was again with the developments of the lander and rover completely indigenously carried out, and a large number of new developments had to be carried out, because as the first experience of Chandrayaan-1 was a moon impact probe which descended onto the surface of the moon in an uncontrolled manner, while in Chandrayaan-2 we had a lander which made use of throttleable engines to control the descent of the gadget onto the surface of the moon in a controlled manner, making use of a set of engines with deep throttling capability. And then by controlling its thrust as it descends, we were expecting it to land it safely on the moon. And the Chandrayaan-2 itself had a large number of scientific experiments on the orbiter, and we'll see some of the details in the subsequent slides. And then it had the orbiter, the rover, all these instruments were part of the thing. And for this particular satellite was launched using our GSLV Mark III, which is the highest capacity launch vehicle which we had developed. While the original Chandrayaan-2 program, when it started, we had envisaged use of a lower capacity geostationary satellite launch vehicle. But by the time, since we had the capacity to use GSLV Mark III, we enhanced the total mission and then used GSLV Mark III for this exercise. So Chandrayaan-2 itself, if you see, we had 3 segments: orbiter, a lander named as Vikram, and rover with the name Pragyan was what was envisaged. And this slide also shows you some of the images of the orbiter and also the lander and the rover and also the integrated module. If you look at the payloads that were there on Chandrayaan-2, and the payloads were a terrain mapping camera, which is again a 3-directional viewer. That means we had a fore, aft, and nadir viewing capability of the surface of the moon as the satellite goes around the moon at 100-kilometer circular orbit. And then we had the Chandrayaan-2 large area soft X-ray spectrometer, what we call it as class, and then X-ray solar monitor. Then we also had an orbiting high resolution camera. One of the objectives was, while the initial landing site was located using the data obtained from whether it using that the original landing site was identified as part of Chandrayaan-2 mission itself. What we had planned is this orbiting high resolution camera will look at the landing site and generate high resolution images of that. And using those images, we had planned to fine tune our landing location. And towards this orbiting high resolution camera with a resolution of about 25 to 30 centimeters from an altitude of 100 kilometers for the moon was what was planned and realized. Then we had 2 instruments which actually enabled us to improve upon the observation capability what we had in Chandrayaan-1. And in Chandrayaan-1, as you are aware, the key discoveries happened by virtue of Moon Mineralogy Mapper and the MINISAR. And in Chandrayaan-2, we indigenously developed these 2 instruments, and we significantly enhanced the capabilities of these 2 instruments. The infrared imaging spectrometer, the capability improvement was it not only improved the spatial resolution, but also extended the spectral resolution from 3 get a lot of data from the satellite. SAR, we replaced it with a dual frequency SAR, L and S band synthetic aperture radar operating in a polarization mode. And in fact, this is a very unique instrument today, providing very significant inputs. In fact, you will see some of the slides showing the results of this particular instrument. And then, of course, we had the Chandra's atmospheric also anatomy of the moon bound hyperstructure, ionospheric atmosphere, hypersensitive ionospheric atmosphere. Then on Vikram, the lander, we had again a Langmuir probe and a Chandra surface thermophysical experiment and an instrument for lunar seismic activity were planned. And on the rover, we had an alpha particle X-ray spectrometer and also laser-induced breakdown spectroscopy. So these were the things that were planned. And then, of course, the prime objectives were enhance the capability of Chandrayaan-1, improve on observation of both water molecules, and also the chemical composition subsurface water using the dual band synthetic aperture radar, then exospheric water using CHASE-2, and mineralogy, chemistry, regolith thickness, ionospheric studies, and then global mapping, topography, three-dimensional mapping, and also high-resolution imaging using the orbiting high-resolution camera. Then again, the very important themes, this we have covered. And this shows you, for example, the auto compatibility tests that were carried out on the satellite, then the vibration tests that were done, then the assembly of on the launch vehicle. The satellite itself was integrated with the launch vehicle, our own GSLV Mark III, and then this was used for launching. And then this also shows you just before the heat shield assembly, how the satellite was integrated onto the capsules. This again shows some of the deployment tests that were carried out on the satellite for the rover deployment. And in fact, for Chandrayaan-2, in terms of the communication links for the orbiter, lander, and rover, while we had the experience of Chandrayaan-1, here again, making use of our deep space network at Bailadu, and also using the facilities available through the interaction with NASA's facilities, both within their own USA as well as in Europe, as well as in Australia. We had in 2 gigahertz channel as well as in the X band for data transmission. We had capability to link the orbiter with the lander, rover with the lander and the orbiter, and all of them through the satellite and also directly from lander to Earth. In fact, this is the key phase where much of the initial phase activity happened, where we launched the satellite from GSLV Mark III, while the first launch attempt had to be aborted because of a small incident in the launch vehicle, one of the high pressure storage device. And then a week later, on the 22nd of July, we were able to launch the satellite. And in fact, the launcher gave the orbiter a significant boon or a gift by putting the satellite into a much higher apogee, as a result of which we had substantial fuel available in the orbiter. And this has resulted in orbiter's life significantly increasing. We started with something like 170 kilometer by 40,000 kilometer orbit. And every time the satellite's engines were fired to increase the apogee, we went through a unique combination of increasing the apogee in a systematic manner. And of course, this particular mode of increasing the altitude of the satellite and getting the satellite captured on the moon makes use of the capabilities, the limitations that we have in the system, a limitation of limited fuel carrying capability of the launch vehicle, and also the limited launch weight capability of our launcher. All of this is optimized, and by continuously increasing the apogee using the satellite, the engines, we increase from 170 by 40,000 to gradually go up to 170 by almost 1 lakh kilometers, and then get into moon or lunar transfer trajectory. And then during this transfer trajectory, also monitor the trajectory of the moon, of the launcher, the satellite, and keep studying its performance. And then at a precise moment, when the satellite is in the gravitational vicinity of moon, reorient the satellite and reduce its velocity just sufficiently so that the satellite gets captured into again another highly elliptical orbit. Then using the satellite's capability, gradually reduce the apogee and get into a circular orbit of nearly 100 kilometers. And that's how, over a period of time, this particular series of maneuvers were done. and we were able to successfully put the satellite, a composite vehicle of orbiter as well as the lander, into the circular orbit of the moon around in the September. And then subsequently the lander was separated from the orbiter, and after the separation of the lander from the orbiter, the lander went around the moon again progressively with reduced altitude, and then finally on the power descent mode. When it was done, the satellite, actually the lander, after separation from the moon's orbiter, gradually descended onto the surface of the moon. And of course, we were very close to the target, and within a few hundreds of meters, when we had the event of the lander going beyond the control of its set limits, and as a result of that, it hard landed or crash landed on the surface of the moon. But otherwise, the orbiter is performing very well. And then orbiter, we have a large number of instruments, and this orbiter today is operating around 100 kilometers around the moon in a circular orbit. And we have a number of instruments which I had pointed out earlier, which is actually providing us a feast, or you can say a large amount of data. And then this orbiter high resolution camera, which can provide almost 28 centimeter to 25 centimeter resolution images from an altitude of 100 kilometers. And today, this is one of the very high resolution images from an orbiting platform for moon. And with time and the systems permitting, later the satellite will be further brought down from 100 kilometers to 50 kilometers, and subsequently even lower orbit, where we will be able to generate much higher resolution images using the satellite data, this orbiter data. In fact, you can see the kind of very high resolution images you are able to get. In fact, using these orbiter data, we had fine-tuned the landing location, and also we had uplinked the images captured from this, so to decide on when the lander descended and was going to touch down, its point of touchdown was fine-tuned using the very high resolution images. What you are seeing here, you can see very fine boulders, and because of the sun, moon, and observation geometry, with the sun elevation at a very close to horizon, long shadows result in our ability to detect objects of even small heights, for ensuring that you could detect the boulders, if any, present in the area of the landing. In fact, this particular image data now is going to be the real database on the basis of which our Chandrayaan-3 landing location will be fine-tuned, and we will also be able to pick up locations which are much more suitable for landing compared to what we had planned in Chandrayaan-1. In fact, here also you can see the sharpness and the finer details you can see from this orbiting high resolution camera. In fact, the other instrument that is there on this is a terrain mapping camera, TMC, and this is a improvement over the version what we had flown in Chandrayaan-1, where in Chandrayaan-1 we had made use of a single optical head. Here it is makes use of 3 optical heads, and then using a detector both in terms of weight, power, and volume, we are able to significantly improve, and we can get very high resolution stereo view of the moon using this, with the 3 views, minus 25 degrees, 0 degrees, and plus 25 degrees, enabling us to pick up the satellite, using the satellite, very high resolution and also stereo views of the surface of the moon. And at 100 kilometers, using the optical season and also the microwave season, the data is being collected. You can see the kind of 3D view that one can get, and from the satellite data we have. and also a wrinkle edge near the Dorsa K location on Moon. Yeah, the other thing I was talking about is the significant improvement we had done in the instrument infrared imaging spectroscopy. Here you can see that the infrared imaging, which can go from about 0.85, zero point 0.9 micron up to 5 micron, can cover a large wavelength region. And using this particular instrument and also using the higher spatial resolution it has got, we are able to do much, we'll be able to actually improve upon the basic observation capability what we had. In fact, this slide really shows you how we can go beyond 3 micron up to 5 micron. And as a result of that, make use of the complete absorption region of the water and water molecules present on the moon, and also enable us to improve on the scientific findings on the surface of moon. In fact, this payload also has a large number of very intrinsic components and very high capability. And this entire instrument is indigenously developed with the optics and the optical component, including the high resolution gratings, all developed within India using the Indian industry. And today this instrument is working fine and providing us excellent results. And in fact, these are some of the results obtained from while observing the moon. We can go up to very long wavelength region, up to 5 microns. Then the other instrument I was talking about is a dual frequency synthetic aperture radar, the L and S band. And this is a fully polarimetric measurements of the moon it's able to do. And it can go to very high resolution up to 2 meters slant range. And it can image in hybrid polarimetry also. So, and this shows you the very compact dual frequency SAR that has been realized, and it can give between 2 meter to 75 meter resolution and a 10-kilometer swath, and in the noise equivalent sigma naught coefficient is about 30 dB at the swath center. And you can see the kind of images that one is getting from this satellite SAR images that are there. L band, the radio frequency synthetic aperture radar image. And you can also see the full polarimetric image generated of one of the Pitiscus crater. It's an internal crater. You can see the walls. And then of course you also have the Earth's studying Earth's extended magnetosphere, that is GEOTAIL, using the plasma around the moon. And you've got a very high sensitivity X-ray spectrometer, which is operating and providing us data from the moon. So this is a X-ray spectrometer, which actually makes use of the solar X-rays for detection. And this shows actually solar flare observed from the solar X-ray monitor, and it can actually shown that it has got a very high sensitivity and can pick up very low level flares also. And then this is the infrared spectrometer, how you are able to get the spectrum. A lot of detailed studies are going on where making use of this particular imaging instrument, how to get more and more information. This is in progress. Today, the Chase, again, the mass spectrometer is carrying out systematic studies of the atmosphere of the upper levels observation, and then trying to study the kind of molecules that are present orbiting the moon. And this is a quadrant pole mass spectrometer, which can go from 1 to 300 AMU with a 0.5 AMU resolution. And of course, beyond Chandrayaan-2, of course, currently, as you're aware, in Chandrayaan-2, we could not succeed in effectively carrying out a soft landing onto the surface of the moon. And because of that, the Chandrayaan-3 mission is being planned, and then Chandrayaan-3 will carry the lander as well as the rover, and then this lander and rover will be taken into orbit by a propulsion module, and this propulsion module will be orbiting the moon, and it will be similar to our orbiter except that they will not carry many of the payloads what the orbiter carried. And today the orbiter of Chandrayaan-2 is providing us a significant capability, and we have all the subsystem functioning well and producing the various data sets from the SAR as a synthetic aperture radar, as well as on the, you have the imaging spectrometer, chase, X-ray monitor, and a host of that. And then based on Chandrayaan-2's experience, the Chandrayaan-3 mission is being planned, and work is in progress on this. Okay, so this in a nutshell is in a summary the kind of activities that we did in Chandrayaan-1. And then as you can see, the whole program of Chandrayaan was an effort, while Chandrayaan-1 enabled us to significantly demonstrate our ability to do, you can say, beyond our geostationary platform, which we started with. We built our launch vehicle to take satellites into geostationary orbit, making use of it for communication and navigation as well as for Earth observation. We had that capability extended, and we took it to Moon and then to Mars, and then today we have got Chandrayaan-2 orbiting around the Moon, and then in future we are planning the further activities for Chandrayaan-1 and also other space science mission. And now I'm available for question and answers, and if you have any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer. Over to Sudhir.
Thank you, sir. You have given a lot of insights in Chandrayaan 1 and 2, and you have given some planning of Chandrayaan 3 also. But we have received so many questions. So I would be able to ask some of the questions which I have noted down. Sir, actually, there is one question. What happened in the lander in Chandrayaan 2? That is a very interesting question.
Correct. See, in any design, what happens is you envisage certain limits of performance, and you also expect certain environmental conditions. That means you are designing the experiment for a certain situation which you are likely to encounter, and based on those you will design your system both in terms of hardware complexity and then the software complexity to deal with the observations. And then as you are performing that activity, as long as you are within the bounds of what you had designed, your experiment is going to succeed. So in this particular situation also, while the activity starting from power descent, the first almost 14 to 15 minutes of the activity, everything went quite smoothly. During the end of our the rough braking phase and the fine braking phase, we started encountering some deviations. And as a result of these deviations, the limits within which we had envisaged the system will perform, we encountered a larger deviation. So as a result of that, the situation could not be handled. So probably we had a couple of extreme conditions coming together in this particular case. And as a result of this, we were not able to actually reduce the velocity of the instrument lander to the requisite value before it actually hit the surface of the moon.
Okay. Thank you, sir. There is one more question. Since ISRO has started Human Space Program of India.
Yeah.
So
The human space program also, if you see, it's a natural progress as the space agency starts building its capability, builds higher and higher capacity launch vehicles, And then as you keep building and as the country's economy also improves, the natural consequence of the space missions progress in this era of, you can say, space being the fourth frontier. India also, though it had been talking about entering into the human space program, it actually was doing certain critical technology development activities. But then subsequently, India decided to get into the human space program, and the work is in progress. We have a separate human space flight center which has been established, and then work on making the launch vehicle fully human rated, and then training the astronauts, building the capability. All this work is progressing, and the, the original target was, of course, before the 75th anniversary of Indian independence, which was going to be in 2022 uh, August. This was the target. But now, as the situation unfolds, or the conditions unfold, we have to wait and see. But then, basically, the human space program is a consequence of the capability that India has built up in the space domain, and also its ability in terms of economics that it is able to do. And then, of course, the whole scenario is changed with COVID, and then
COVID.
currently what the world is facing. So we have to now wait and see how things develop.
Uh, Sir, from LEO to GEO, what kind of control mechanisms are considered?
Okay. See, the satellites what we are using, the satellites which is put into the orbit, it what we call as a transfer orbit by the launch vehicle. See, the satellite makes use of its own propulsion system. So it carries either monopropellant or bipropellant, and it carries these propellants in storage devices. And then using specifically designed engines, the motors, the satellite makes use of its propulsion capability, and it can provide certain impulse, specific impulse, and then thrust the satellite and take it into higher and higher orbits. So typically in any launch, as you are aware, that if you take an object to a particular height from the Earth, and at that height, depending on how much velocity you can impart to that satellite, that means both the magnitude and direction, the type of orbit that gets determined. So at any given height, if you give the satellite the critical velocity, the satellite will go into a circular orbit at that altitude. If you give more than the critical velocity, the satellite, the point of release becomes perigee and the other point becomes apogee. Now to go from LEO to GEO, you need to increase the satellite's apogee up to the GEO orbit of 36,000 kilometers. And then when you reach at that 36,000 kilometer, again, you have to make use of the satellite's resources of providing the higher thrust to circularize the orbit. So you make use of the thrusters, and we have built, for example, our bipropellant thrusters which are there in the launch vehicle, in the satellite, and making use of it, we do this from transfer orbit to the actual orbit capabilities. And for this, you should be able to command and then sense the velocity change that you are giving, direction change you are having on the satellite, and have a good communication during this period. And if you are capable of doing these things, then you can take the satellite to different orbits you want.
Thank you, sir. Sir, there is one question. What will be the future of micro and nano class satellite in coming years?
Actually, these micro and nano satellites are demonstrating their capability to such an extent. As we can see today, for example, if you see the first computers that built had to be housed in huge buildings, and then it used to consume huge amount of power. And as the technology kept improving, today what the first generation computers were able to do, we are able to do probably in our mobiles or even smaller devices than that. So in the same way, as the electronics, that means computational capabilities improve tremendously, what satellites required a very heavy mass, heavy power generation on the satellite. Such things are now being able to do using very small satellites or nano and pico satellites even. So using this, there's going to be a significant change in the way things happen. And also the whole philosophy of when you have large satellites, one satellite malfunction, both in terms of your resources lost and also the ability to replace them becomes a question. Whereas if you have a large number of smaller satellites doing the function, loss of one satellite may not even matter. So that's how things can be configured. So this is on the positive side. And on the flip side, of course, making a large number of them, then aggregating them, making them cooperative and using them, that is building better and better intelligence into the system. This is the area both in terms of artificial intelligence, learning, cooperating systems. That's how the thing is going. Actually, this is the direction in which things are moving. Still, you will require heavier satellites only for those cases where certain technological limitations of observation capability or power generation becomes essential, will continue to demand heavier satellites. But otherwise, smaller and smaller satellites is the way things are going now. And how the technology develops and how newer technological capabilities build up, we have to wait and see.
Thank you, sir. Sir, like in the introduction, I quoted one Sanskrit word, Adhigochati Jnanati Gyata. Learning, and learning. So, like Chandrayaan 2 mission failed lander. So, what kind of the learning ISRO has learned from Vikram lander failure, so that that could be implemented while designing the lander for Vikram Chandrayaan 3?
Okay, so like I was explaining, when you are planning any mission, so you have initially certain specific objective. Now for meeting that objective, then you start designing the system, and depending on the kind of hardware you can build, there'll be certain limitations. So you cannot design exactly what you want, because for doing such a design, you require either heavier, the larger volume, larger power, larger weight, etc. So then you start actually trade off. That means depending on what resources you have, how much trade-off of the margins you want to build in. That means the larger excursions in the encountered phenomena, encountered limits. So today, one of the things is when we had planned earlier with the kind of resources we had put a large number of constraints, and to meet those constraints, it was is where the difficulty we encountered. Today, by virtue of the observation capability we have on the lander, on the orbiter, for example, like I said, you got a very high resolution camera, which is giving us almost 25 centimeter. And then subsequently, when we bring down the altitude of this satellite to further 50 kilometers and maybe even less, so we will be able to generate images with even 12 centimeter to 15 centimeter type of resolution. So we will be able to identify our touchdown location and build larger margins in the error ellipse of touchdown. So if you have larger error ellipse margin, then the satellite or the lander capability what you have to build, that means the errors you can allow on the lander to its function. That means originally if you were demanding that you should touch down within 500 meter or 20 meter radius, now you can go to maybe 100 meter or even kilometer radius. So that means while you improve upon your designed capability, you allow larger and larger margins in the system. So that's how, this is one of the key things. That means you design the system to narrower and narrower limits, but then ensure you have greater tolerance for those errors. And then even with large excursions in the encountered condition, you will still have a safe, robust mission, both in terms of your ability to design, look for deviations, and look for functionalities, safe functionalities and deviation. So that is a kind of thing. And you should be able to understand. So since we have now, in a way, first-hand experience of Chandrayaan 2, we should be able to significantly improve on in Chandrayaan 3. And the real takeaway for us from this thing was how to minimize the limitations that we have in the total system.
Okay. Sir, you have shown one graph, flux versus time in XSM results. So there is a one question in XSM results, why was there is a huge difference between the September data and October data in graph of flux versus time?
They are not for the same regions.
Okay.
One, they are not same observations.
Mhm.
So that's one of the things.
Okay. Sir, is there any allowances for private space agencies to partner up with ISRO?
Yeah, actually, that's what, see, as you can see today, if you see space is a fourth frontier. And then space requires a certain minimum technological capability to be built. Today, if you look at India, you have a technological capability which it has demonstrated. That means you can design your own satellite instruments, launch vehicles, and then carry the satellites into orbit, different orbit from LEO to even planetary missions. And then as this capability has been built in the country, and both in terms of communication, earth observation, as well as the various environmental studies, and tomorrow as the space, which is the fourth frontier, allows the enterprise like man conquered land, ocean, and airspace. Space itself is looking at conquering, looking at habitats outside the planet Earth, whether making Mars habitable or other planetary locations. So there's a huge opportunity for exploring space, exploiting space, and also space adventure, space tourism. So there is a huge opportunity for the enterprise. So what the country is also looking at is how we can actually leverage on the technological capability that has been built, and using this technological capability, how the countries, both private, public, as well as academic institutions, every one of them become partners in this, and country as a whole gets a fair share of the global space market. That is the basic idea of the government looking at bringing in more and more private entities and enabling more and more private entities to get into the fourth frontier of the humanity, the space. And how to make it happen is the real challenge.
Sir, some enlightenment about Aditya 1 mission, which
Yeah,
is pending.
right. Aditya 1 is, as you can see, basically, you're familiar that scientists and engineers try to set up experiments and conduct experiments during the total solar eclipse, which will be visible at very specific locations on Earth and for a few minutes of duration. For those few minutes of total solar eclipse time, scientists spend a lot of time and effort and then establish those experiments and conduct the observation for that limited period of time. What Aditya plans to do is, it by virtue of putting an observatory at a specific location in space using the satellite being located at an L1 point, the Lagrange point, it can look continuously at sun, and then by putting a sort of, you can say, coronagraph or masking the photosphere of the moon, sorry, sun, you can look at from 1.03 or 1.3 Earth moon, sorry, sun radii to almost up to 3 sun radii. In that region, you can observe the happenings in various wavelengths, and then using the instruments on the Aditya, the solar coronagraph and other instruments, study the coronal mass ejection and also the tails, and making use of this. So what this does is it provides you effectively a total solar eclipse observation condition for very long duration, and using that the scientists can make specific observations. And so Aditya mission is actually planning to conduct its experiments in this way. And the instruments are getting designed, getting ready, and also the satellite is getting ready. And then subsequently, when this satellite will be flown into the orbit, we'll be able to carry out these observations of sun using this particular instrument of Aditya.
At present, scientists are
Yes.
studying about corona, not that corona.
This is
At present, the
coronavirus.
scientists are studying this corona, not that corona.
Yeah, correct. Now, of course, a lot of change is happening. Corona
Yes,
has made its presence, has changed the entire scenario.
scenario. Sir, there is one question. Generally, when lander or orbiter used to get placed in interplanetary missions, what kind of the like deep space communication techniques are used for transmitting the data?
Okay, now here, of course, as far as the moon is concerned, it's about 4 lakh kilometers when it is at the farthest. And then if you see Mars, 200 million kilometers to 400 million kilometers. So basically what you need is, like in any communication system, you need to make sure that you have enough energy of the signal you have transmitted, you are able to receive on ground. So one of the things is you keep increasing the diameter of the antenna what you are receiving. So for example, today we have in the Vailadu ground station at near Bangalore, a 32-meter antenna developed and designed totally indigenously, of course, and then established at that place. So this 32-meter diameter antenna can receive signals coming in up to X band, and also in the lower frequency C band and also S band. And using this large dimensioned antenna, you can communicate with the satellite antennas, which could be few hundred millimeters up to 700 millimeter or 500 millimeter, that dimension antenna. So as you need to go farther and farther in distance, what you need to make sure is the power of transmission, the dimensions of the antenna, you need to increase. And also there are specific wavelengths in which the communication has to be done. So you have to build transmitters using that kind of thing. And also you need to build the coding techniques such that you can make use of this coding gain for receiving when you receive the signal, the integrity of the signal is maintained. And so primarily you need to develop capability of operating in different frequencies and increasing the signal reception capability of these communicating systems.
Sir, there is one more question. What is the rocket initiatives by ISRO? Sounding rocket.
Yeah, sounding rockets, we continue to have sounding rockets, and these sounding rockets are actually continue to be flown from our Tumba Equatorial Rocket Launching Site. And these actually carry some upper atmospheric research instruments, and then they make observations as they're ascending into the atmosphere. And this data continues to be used for various upper atmospheric research activities, and it also provides an opportunity for student community to develop some small payloads and then fly them.
Okay, thank you, sir. There is one more interesting question. We keep hearing about UFOs and aliens. Has ISRO came across any such instances?
Yeah, so far we have not come across any specific, either in the course of our observation or our activities, any such things.
So, sir, this Chandrayaan 3 has been approved by Government of India?
Yeah, Chandrayaan 3 is an approved program, and
Uh-huh.
work was in the full swing. And then, of course, now because of the current scenario, then we have to see how it will impact, or whether there will be any impact of that in terms of the schedule, etc. But otherwise, it's a program which has been cleared by the government, and ISRO is realizing the complete system and is moving ahead with this activity.
Sir, enlighten something about the space debris. What kind of work ISRO is doing in the field of space debris collection?
Okay, see, one of the key things, as we can see, like earlier you were pointing out, the number of satellites, smaller and smaller satellites, and more larger number of them getting into space. So the continuously the number of objects which are in space by virtue of what the human beings are doing in terms of putting satellites. If you look at it, probably right from the time the launching activity started, more than 8,000 plus launches would have orbit satellites would be in orbit, and today more than few thousand satellites will be in functional. So one of the key things is what it can do is an object which is orbiting and which is not in control of any particular agency then can come in the way of other satellites which are operating. So today one of the things that happens is every orbiting satellite keeps looking for any of these objects which are in space, and if any of them are likely to come in the vicinity of our operating satellite, we have to do some small maneuvers to ensure that our current operating satellite does not collide with this object and get handicapped. So as a result of this, this activity is to be continuously carried out. And we also make use of the certain specific public domain information available on the orbiting objects in space. And then as a result of that, you also would have seen that many times ISRO at the time of launch changes the launch time by a minute or half a minute or a couple of minutes. This is at the time of launch because what is called as a collision probability analysis shows that the trajectory of the vehicle as well as the trajectory of the object that is being inserted into orbit, if it comes in the vicinity of any of the known debris objects, then the timing of launch is changed to avoid such a thing. And then orbiting satellites also will have to be changed slightly. It's maybe the height is increased or decreased to avoid the collisions. This is other thing that has to be done. So what this demands is you have to keep continuously monitoring, and if more and more objects come into space, then these probabilities also will increase, and this will produce significant, as the time progresses, an increased burden. So a large number of collaborative efforts across the agencies and also groups are going on how to mitigate this, because there is a lot of research and experiments in progress to actually mitigate this. But at ISRO, we have established now a couple of observation stations, and we also are looking at in a continuous manner how to make use of our observation capabilities to track and observe these objects in space so that we can also contribute to the global community in enabling the global community to actually bring more and more targets into this classification and library.
Sir, we can understand now due to COVID-19, everything is on hold. Can you enlighten us with the Vyom Mitra mission?
Yeah, see, right now, of course, all the activities, whatever have been planned and approved, are expected to continue. But then, whether there will be any schedule impact, etc., that we have to see. But otherwise, today we have a large number of activities which are in progress, which are going on. And how this COVID will impact is still a question mark. We won't be able to tell you at this point how it is going to impact. But then the whatever planned activities are there, they are moving ahead, and we have to wait and see.
Any plan for mission orbiter, Mars orbiter mission plan too?
Yeah, currently we have what is called as the Apex Science Board, which is looking at what kind of missions have to be taken beyond Aditya. Today we have what is called as a Aditya mission, which is approved, Chandrayaan 3 there. Then you also have Mars and Venus mission, and then other interplanetary mission and also exoplanet mission. These missions are actually being studied in greater detail, and then they will go through the process of selection and then approval both at the ISRO level and then at the government level. So currently a detailed study and the assessment work is in progress on the next Mars mission as well as the Venus mission. The study is in progress, and detailed after detailed assessment and evaluation, these projects will be taken up.
Any planning for own international space station?
No, that of course is space station, etc., will be the natural consequences of the human space program. But then will be taking up all of that in a progression. First task will be to put humans into orbit and bring them back safely, so that you have demonstrated capability of heavy objects being taken into orbit. And then space station also would require a heavier capacity launch vehicle to be realized. So this is a continuous process. As you get into the human space program, you need to make sure that you have all these capabilities built up, and as both the economic strength and the technical capability improves, these are all the natural progression route.
So there is one technical question that mini-SAR, synthetic aperture radar, and M3, can they also map the topography and geophysical feature over the moon?
Mini-SAR, for example, can definitely do the topography because it can also generate, depending on the kind of observation you make using these synthetic aperture radars, you can actually get the surface features and then variations on the surface. The elevation models can all be generated. And in addition to that, by virtue of the polarizations what you have, you can also get different features and then scattering based on the interpretation of the scattering that happens. You can get different features extracted from the our SAR instruments. And then imaging instrument, the radiometer itself, for example, imaging spectrometer operating in the infrared wavelength region is also an imaging instrument which produces the maps of the surface of the moon. And since you are doing this mapping in a large number of very narrow bands and with a high spatial resolution and on a repetitive basis, you can get temporal variations as well as you can say based on your ability to do spectral deconvolution and also spectral analysis, you can derive a huge amount of information on the surface of the moon.
Sir, you have worked on reusable launch vehicles also.
Yeah.
So can you just tell what it is basically?
See, basically the idea itself is to be very clear. The idea is how to reduce the cost of access to space. See, obviously, for example, you can easily visualize today, if an aircraft were to carry just one flight, that means from people from place A to place B, what would be the situation? Would it be economically viable at all? Only because you are able to make use of the same device for a large number of operations, the cost of building that particular object, it gets shared over a large number of operations and cost comes down. In the same way, for future, if launch vehicle has to become cost effective, same launch vehicle we should be able to use for multiple operations. And then if you are able to use it for multiple operations, then the cost gets shared over multiple operations and the cost of access comes down. So what it means is you need to have a launcher which takes the object from ground to space and come back from space to Earth and then repeat this whole exercise multiple times. So this of course also changes the design concept because see, for example, today if you take an aircraft, the aircraft you also have to design for fatigue. That means a large number of cycles of operation. If it does, then it can also get into fatigue mode of operation. Whereas in the launch vehicle, since you are doing it for a one-time operation, etc., the fatigue does not figure that prominently. But if you start looking at reusability, depending on how many times you want to reuse, then the design also has to account for this. So in this manner, there'll be a large number of features which you have to build it into the design. Whereas in the earlier case, if you see the atmosphere, by the time you leave the Earth's atmosphere, you have not encountered very high Mach numbers for the launch vehicle. But when you have to come down, come back, you are encountering the atmosphere for a large duration, then the ability to shield the objects inside from the heat, this again becomes an issue. So the whole process involved in reusable launch vehicle in terms of design complexities is very different. And then the other things, of course, is the whole process of carrying out this design itself, and then making the object come back safely, land on Earth, and then making it go through refurbishment process. That's how it does. And another thing that is looked at is if you are able to actually make use of some of the resource that is available in the atmosphere while you are going. For example, when we have in our cryo engines oxygen, if we can pick up oxygen from the atmosphere, then the amount of oxygen you need to carry from ground reduces. So what we did in our reusable launch vehicle technology demonstrator were some attempts at trying to do this scramjet engine experiment. When it was done, we were able to sustain the combustion using the oxygen available in the atmosphere and hydrogen which we carried in our vehicle, and using this we could sustain a combustion for about 19 seconds, and this was of course a very successful demonstration. Then the other thing was a vehicle taken up to a height of 100 kilometers, brought back using virtually landing it on water using the various mechanisms of looking at an object returning through the Earth's atmosphere up to almost 6 to 7 Mach number, then build the surfaces, control surfaces, test the control and guidance laws, and also build certain instruments on the vehicle so that as it is coming through the atmosphere, it detects all these variations, and then building that autonomy into the vehicle. These were the experiments. So what we had done was these experiments, and also the experiment is going to continue by building in landing the vehicle not on land, on the water, but on land. So reusable launch vehicle technology requires a huge number of such capabilities. And of course, we are very much limited today by virtue of, for example, the amount of activities that are going on, and also the time available within the organization for many of these research activities. And of course, today, if you see globally, the what SpaceX has demonstrated, the first stage it has brought back many times and landed precisely at a particular location. And here again, another important aspect one has to worry about is that we have got solid rockets in our booster stage. And even if we bring back that particular segment, actually it is almost like only the casing being brought back. Whereas if you make use of liquid engines, then it's only the fuel which you have to refill after refurbishing, and then you can make use of. So there are a large number of issues, but then this is an essential activity. We need to build these capabilities, and that's how we are moving, and the work is in progress in this.
Sir, recently our Honorable Prime Minister told Atmanirbhar Bharat. So what kind of activities are expected to plan by the Department of Space or Space Commission or ISRO?
As you can see, in fact, ISRO and India has demonstrated space technology is a fully self-reliant activity. It's a technological capability built within the country using Indian industry, and a large number of industries, in fact, are working with ISRO during this period. And also, even whatever limited elements that on which for which we have to depend on external sources, today practically the all the items which are single source are the ones which we have to worry about, single source element. Otherwise, multiple source elements are there. You can get them from multiple sources. And ISRO has been putting emphasis on development of indigenous technology for many of them. For example, if you look at Maraging steel, which was one time a big issue, but that was now that is completely indigenously realized. Then you have got many materials, the alloys, and also propulsion element, and a huge number of these things is all built indigenously. And the effort to continue this and then make more and more of these happen within the country will be the basic emphasis. And this all of this will happen with greater emphasis and rigor.
Sir, since we have to wind up the session. Just one quick, maybe short note from your side. What may be the future prospects for the aerospace or avionics engineers within our country?
See, if we look at in general terms, the India in terms of aerospace, if we look at now the government's earlier effort also to make aircraft, the air industry, where even smaller and smaller towns being connected and a large number of airports coming up, and then even building aircraft within the country. All of this, and then Atmanirbhar Bharat also would require that
Yes.
aircrafts are built in the country for the future, and then the aircrafts of the new generation where they make more cost effective and then fuel efficient, and also the new generation vehicles which are even not just non-renewable fuels, but also like electric propulsion based systems or electric vehicles. So in that condition, and also you would be hearing about cars being able to fly and then do the transportation using that. That means vehicles which are capable of moving on land as well as in air. So the world is moving towards this. In fact, today also there are prototypes of vehicles which are capable of flying without using moving parts. So that kind of technologies are getting developed. So if you, and then space itself is a great opportunity because it provides the ability to look at space tourism, space adventure, space exploitation, and also using space for carrying out the essential activities on Earth. The very fact that, for example, just the recent super cyclone also, it is because of the India Meteorological Department was able to provide very accurate prediction of the landfall and the time of this occurrence of this particular thing because of the satellite inputs it got, satellite based inputs. And then whether it is weather or for monitoring, reconnaissance, earth observation. So the space has become an essential component of human life, and the features that we enjoy and the facilities that we enjoy depends on that. So aerospace is actually a very significant part, and research in this area to make it more and more cost effective, and also and more use of drones for various activities is also increasing. So there is a huge opportunity for aerospace, and then it depends on how people bring up newer capabilities and newer abilities in this area that will determine. And then in terms of autonomy, in terms of new technologies, the opportunities are tremendous. And currently the way the government is looking at, probably the entrepreneurs also will have greater opportunity to carry out these kind of things. I see a great future, and this is one of the, you can say, uh, demanding areas, and it will continue to be a demanding area.
Thank you so much, sir. And finally, I, on behalf of University of Petroleum and Energy Studies, UPES Dehradun, and the entire support of the staff and our esteemed attendees in the webinar, would like to take this opportunity to place on record our heartily thanks to Padma Shri A.S. Kiran Kumarji for blessing us with his gracious presence and talking and taking out valuable time of his busy schedule to enlighten us today. It's always been our pleasure to have you, sir, with us, and we look forward to see you again for the upcoming events also. Even in the past, we have been supported and we are doing some kind of the research collaboration work, or we can say some kind of the works we are doing with IIRS Dehradun, National Remote Sensing Center, and some of the faculties who have come from different backgrounds. They worked at VSSC lab. So ISRO has already always been supporting to UPES since long. So thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much for your kind time.
Thank you. Thank you for the
Thank you, sir. Thank
opportunity.
you so much, sir. Jai
Thank
Hind.
you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You can leave.